Y'all know what it is.
Hey there, and welcome back to Eggs. Today's special guest is Austin, Texas-based founder and CEO at Aim for Hire, Chase Kocher. Aim for Hire is a technology recruitment agency that partners exclusively with well-funded, hyper-growth tech startups. On the heels of 5 years in the tech consulting and recruiting space, Chase realized that most tech recruiting agencies were a dime a dozen, with outdated systems that really only cater to the largest corporations. This led him to cultivate a desire to deliver value to the best up-and-coming startups in the country and fill a major gap in the talent market. Joining us today for a fast-paced conversation about the state of the technology recruiting market, the challenges in finding and placing the best talent with the companies who need them, what employers can do to draw the best tech talent, and so much more. Please join me in welcoming to the show, Chase Kocher. Hey, Chase, how are you, man?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Excellent. So glad to have you here. It's funny, I've never been to Austin until this year at spring break. We went down there. And I got to tell you, I love Texas. I'd never been into Texas outside of maybe passing through with some bands I used to manage back in the olden days. And so I hadn't spent any substantial amount of time there, but we came down, we spent about a week there. We have a friend sort of just north of San Antonio. So we ended up spending, a lot of time sort of south of Austin, but we stayed in Austin proper and I just loved it.
That's awesome. Yeah. For a while it's the music capital of the world or the country, though I know Nashville kind of something to say about that, but that's wild that it took that long, but I'm glad you got a chance to get here.
Yeah, no,
it's a cool spot.
Cool. Yeah. And I'm dying to get back.
As someone from Austin, are you a fan or not a fan of South by Southwest?
Ooh, that's a good question. It really is all the locals basically either go on vacation or they, go to some neighboring city here in Texas for the weekend or for a week and just rent out their place for like $3,000 a day. And, kind of like a lot of people actually use it as a business system where it's like all these people are flying in. So they'll just rent up their houses, apartments and make enough to kind of cover rent for the next 6 months, basically. In that one week, it's pretty wild.
That'd be worth it.
But yeah, Austinites, they have their moments, but I think we get a little territorial when everyone and their mother, comes in for the week and kind of tears down the city. But it's a cool event. Obviously, a lot of exciting things going on there.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, what do you do, how you got started?
Yeah, man, I was born and raised here in Austin for the most part, moved around a bit, kind of fell back here after college into the tech space, knew I wanted to be in the tech world. I was not a software engineer, so I didn't know where my fit was going to be in the tech world, but I knew that's where I wanted to be. And so the recruiting space kind of gave me an outlet to get to work with different tech companies in town, as well as, ones across the US. And obviously more of a consultative and recruiting capacity. And then through my career, just kind of was fortunate enough to get to the point where I kind of could step away and start my own shop, and felt like kind of as I got into understanding the tech community in Austin, there was just kind of this underserved, hyper growth startup market, where they needed talent, they needed folks that obviously were high level technical caliber, but also had the culture fit to fit in the startup world. And I just felt like a lot of recruiting firms, as I mentioned in the intro, are a dime a dozen. There's a lot of them. There's a low barrier to entry to start your own firm. So they tend to gravitate towards the easier to fill bigger companies that, it's more about filling seats and a resume volume game. So that's kind of where we identified a market need and have kind of tried to exploit that and grow there.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to ask you, so sort of, I live in a city that's doing much the same thing that Austin is, which is, becoming a major tech hub. They call us the Silicon Slopes here in Salt Lake City now. And but Austin, wasn't always known for tech. We sort of mentioned at the top that it was known for music, and other things like that. But obviously there's been a quick shift to technology. And so as somebody who maybe has the context of having been there for most of their life, do you mind talking a little bit about sort of anything about how that sort of began, and what's happening that's sort of causing that? Why is Austin this sweet spot?
Yeah, we do quite a bit of recruitment in the Utah area, and kind of really outside of California, the west side of the U.S., where there's a lot of talent. For us, I think for Austin, there were some early successes of startups that either derived out of the University of Texas or like had some affiliation there. Obviously, Dell Dell started as just, like every other startup, just a small little company. Obviously, Michael Dell founded it out of his garage, I think. After going to UT, I think he dropped out from UT to pursue Dell, but that created a huge ecosystem, in my opinion. Is like you have this startup that goes from 50 people to thousands in a like unbelievably fast-paced amount of time. And then you have entrepreneurs from that Dell kind of incubator, if you will, that come out and starting their own companies and then hiring UT grads, because a lot of those University of Texas folks obviously want to stay in Austin after college. So I think we've studied a lot of ecosystems across the US, one being Salt Lake City and other cities in Utah that have kind of found ways to tap into the local talent. But also usually starts with one or two of these big success stories, and then people start leaving those companies and starting their own or pursuing opportunities to create their own companies. So I think Austin's been much like that, where it started with Dell and a couple other notable startups, and then it has grown into this kind of rapid fire place to be, Silicon Hills. So it's an exciting market to be in, but it's certainly been a transformation. It wasn't overnight. It certainly took some time.
So you guys get the hills and we get the slopes.
Yeah. Real creative when we're going up with these marketing terms.
Silicon must be the catchword for all of that. How did you get started?
Probably not a ton of skiing there in Austin.
How did you get started in recruiting? Did you just apply for a random job and kind of get your foot in the door there, or was it you go to college for that? Or
I was business major, typical, just came out and knew I wanted to be. I played basketball in college. I was a competitor. I wanted to be in some space that there was some competition and or that there was a competition element. So I wanted to be in sales and interfacing with customers. So the recruiting space was one that allowed me to kind of get out and meet different companies. And in fact, I didn't really know what I wanted to do out of college outside of being in tech. So I was like, recruiting, I get to meet with all these different companies in town that are hiring and growing and develop relationships with them. And then I can figure out what I'm going to do with my career. Was kind of my mindset when I got into it. But as it's progressed, obviously kind of found this niche. And I was a short basketball player growing up. Like I was always the shortest guy on the court. And so I almost grew up with like this chip on my shoulder of like fighting for the little company, the little person that's trying to stand their ground. And so, when we ended up kind of, starting Aim for Hire and really targeting these like hyper growth, unique, but tiny tech startups, it was with that in mind of like, how can we help them have a chance to fight for talent with Amazon, Google, Facebook, big tech? And, how do you do that when they don't have the money or they don't have the resources, they don't have the brand? A lot goes into it, obviously, but that's kind of where I think our passion as a company started from, was just kind of like fighting for that little guy and giving them a chance at kind of becoming, something bigger.
Yeah. Well, so maybe this is I don't know, sort of a naive question or a rudimentary question, but just to be sure that sort of all our audience is up to speed with us, because I think both Mike and I have some experience with, having interfaced with recruiters and things like that, at least. So we understand the business to some degree. Could you just quickly sort of outline what it is that, we would use a recruiter for? So, I mean, I think a lot of times there's this connotation that they're doing the headhunting or they're doing whatever, right? But I don't think people actually think about recruiting or, utilizing a recruiter as part of their sort of job hunt. And so I wonder if you'd talk just a little bit about just sort of the role you guys play in helping people find work.
Absolutely. So I think the most important thing when it comes to recruiting firms, the vast majority of them, the company is going to pay that recruiting firm for finding them somebody. So I think if you're a recruitee or you're a recruit, knowing that like you aren't going to have to pay that recruiter or anything, now like it's going to come from the budget of the company that ends up hiring that person. So I think that's kind of probably one of the biggest stereotypes, or some people just don't fully understand that, but that's usually the model. As far as like when they would use, when a company would use a recruiting firm would be for in-demand talent skill sets. So you're a 50-person company selling data security software. Like you're going to be looking for like talent that can bring maybe data security experience or multiple years of software experience to the table. But recruiting that type of tech pool is insanely competitive. And in the market we live in today, like, when COVID happened, it did cause an unprecedented adoption of software and of technology, like even restaurants, retail, healthcare, all these segments that never really had to adopt tech, like they were kind of set in their older ways. COVID really forced that shift. So all of a sudden you have, I don't even know what the multiple would be, but more than twice as many companies as before that were trying to hire tech people. Now you have all these companies that are new to it and realize they need tech, so they're also hiring. So the demand just like keeps skyrocketing, but the supply is still kind of at an even keel, which makes it difficult. So that I'm just creating the narrative of the demand is what causes the need for a recruiter for a company. Demand, and then of course, like if that skill set can be tough to tap into, we're going out and obviously in LinkedIn, email, Facebook message, whatever it takes to get a hold of the right talent on behalf of the companies that we represent. So as a candidate, like, using a recruiter can give you access to companies that maybe you don't just find on a job board. So if you are hunting for a job, or you're kind of keeping your ear to the ground on where might be like a good company to work for, talking to recruiters, often they represent 5, 10, 20 companies at a time. And that could give you access to a company that you wouldn't have seen on Indeed.com or a job posting on, LinkedIn Jobs or something of that nature. And they're obviously incentivized to try to get you the job. So, it's really someone, in some cases, it's a partner that can kind of help you through it. But recruiters do have kind of a negative stereotype because they tend to they want you to take the job with their client and not other jobs that you might be getting offered. So that's just something to probably be aware of if you do use a recruiter, is just keeping in mind they will look out for your interests, but they're also most likely going to look out for their own first. So just keeping that in mind, that's something to be aware of.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. It's a two-way street.
Do you, when you're looking for a candidate, are you looking for a specific skill set to fill a specific need? Or are you looking for an all-around person that can do a little bit of everything? I'm sure each job is kind of on its own, merit, whatever the client needs. But are you going after someone who just graduated from a boot camp? Or are you looking for someone that's got 10 years experience?
Yeah, great. I think for us at Aim for Hire, like since we're targeting that smaller tech space, like they are looking for people that can wear multiple hats, people that are multifaceted, people that probably don't need a lot of handholding and training. So they do tend to kind of gravitate towards the 5+ year experience folks. Where, however, like as they grow and they build a little more process, then that might be when they start to kind of hire more of someone who just came out of a boot camp or someone that just graduated with a CS degree. So I would say early stage companies, it's tough to get into as a junior level talent because they just don't have any structure in place to kind of help answer your questions or help you get acclimated with the situation. They're looking for like plug and play people that can jump in, take a hold of something and run with it. So I would say it's the company usually dictates that. Some of these bigger companies, you'll deal with recruiters that recruit for Dell or HP or Amazon, Google, and usually they're looking for like a very segmented thing, like because the company's so large, they have hundreds of thousands of software engineers. the work they'll be doing is going to be so siloed that like maybe looking for that skill set and just that skill set is important. But for us with smaller companies, they're wanting everything under the sun, ideally with that candidate. So we tend to go more with the kind of broad skill set. Maybe they've worked in a startup before and they've been a part of that kind of rapid growth.
Okay. I wanted to kind of go back to something you were talking about a minute ago, and it's sort of this idea of supply versus demand, right? That people start bringing in the recruiters at the time that they have high demand but low supply. And so, but I wondered if you could just sort of talk about tech as it sort of evolved a little bit, because I don't recall, and maybe like you said, it has to do with COVID and sort of this unprecedented ramp up in software. But it doesn't seem like there was a surplus before. Like people didn't have trouble getting a job, but there weren't a lot of software engineers standing around waiting for work. Like there were plenty of opportunities around. And so can you talk about just how the industry has shifted and sort of, I guess, why outside of just needing more bodies, is there really more like, I guess, are there not enough students or are there not enough people going into the program to feed these guys?
Yeah, it's just like statistically, because I mean, obviously there's all these different things that come out with unemployment rate of software, computer science type folks. I mean, in 2019, there were a lot of studies, but generally it was like this 5 to 7% unemployment rate for like, technical software engineers, hardware, technical talent in general. And now I just was reading a recent thing by, I'm trying to remember some software company that did surveyed 70,000 engineers, and their unemployment of that 70,000 in the US was less than 2%.
Wow.
So so even just in a matter of a year or two, it's gone from, 6 to 8% unemployment down to 2. And obviously these are different statistics, but I think it is you're spot on with they're clearly, even before all this, there was demand for these software engineers. And now it's just grown kind of astronomically. As far as upcoming generations, I think around 70% of the computer science, software engineering community in the US, I think it was around 70% are between 20 to 30 years old. So those folks are going to be, that talent pool, that 70% is going to be around for the, foreseeably the next 10 to 20 years in software engineering. So that's encouraging. We're not going to have a huge drop off from retirement and things of that nature. The upcoming folks is fascinating because obviously you have people that are starting to see software as maybe a way to make really good money. And if they usually chose a major in finance or in marketing, maybe they decide to look into computer science or some type of software engineering boot camp where you get that exposure, and all of a sudden this demand is kind of piled on top of you, versus if you're going for to be an accountant or being a finance expert and just looking at the demand there. There's still demand, but not to the level of tech. So that I think that's been part of what hopefully the upcoming generations are looking at that data or are aware of that information and might be considering computer science more than they ever have before.
Just sort of pile on there too. One quick question about sort of, the role that now remote work and that kind of stuff is weighing in on this stuff. Cause I know, for example, and this is totally anecdotal, but I know here in the Salt Lake Valley, for example, I think it's something like 98% of people in the marketing design industry, graphic designers, people that do what I do, are basically 98% employed right now. So basically everybody that wants to work is working. And so, but, that's probably not true in other cities or other markets and things like that. And so I wonder, is this demand that you're seeing, obviously you're seeing it in Austin, which is high demand right now. But I mean, is that demand universal or national, or is it, relegated to some select cities like it's always been, like the Silicon Valley types?
Yeah, that's a great question. Talent tends to follow the money, right? And I think, you start to look at some of these tech companies like public, and then you can even look at ones that are backed by venture capital. You can start to kind of track where these venture capital, private equity companies are and where the most activity is. And those tend to be in cities like, obviously Silicon Valley, but in Salt Lake City, in Austin, in Boston, and some of these emerging tech communities, or Boston's probably well established now. But I think that at the end of the day still draws a lot of attention. And like, if you're in computer science, you're probably moving to one of those cities to get the money that you wanted prior to COVID. Now, like this fully remote thing, I mean, I'll tell you, we're working on 30, 40 jobs right now for different clients, and the 90+% of those jobs are fully remote. Like they can sit in any city, any state in the entire country. So if your cost of living in Tulsa, Oklahoma, you can still make kind of this California, Austin, Texas money without the cost of living, which has caused a lot of shifts in the recruitment world for tech talent.
Yeah,
because all of a sudden.
Yeah, I was going to just ask. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I don't know if this is even your expertise, but yeah, that's one of those big issues, right? People that are working for a San Francisco-based company but living in Tulsa, the person doing the same work living in San Francisco is trying to, make, or their dollar doesn't go as far as it does as the person living in Montana or something. And so, have you started to see in your recruiting how companies are dealing with the wage disparity there?
Yeah, it's the FANG, Facebook, Amazon, Apple. They tend to lead trends, and they tend to set the bar on what people should be paid in that space. And since they tend to have a little more money than other tech companies, it does make it incredibly difficult for especially if they're recruiting in Tulsa. Like, how does a local tech company in somewhere in Oklahoma, compete with a 200, 300K base salary that might come from Amazon to someone that's got 2 years experience? So they can't. I mean, they just can't possibly compete with that. So I think that's something that, like, over the last year or two with COVID, is certainly when Amazon, Google, Twitter, all of them came out and said they're going to hire fully remote talent. Like that was a dramatic shift, because all of a sudden, like, if you're a company that's hiring, you're competing with everyone now, or at least those FANG companies, which are the ones that really set the tone for what tech people get to make and what their earnings are and benefits and all that kind of thing. So unless those companies shift back to a back end office, or they start accounting for like your cost of living and when they offer you, which is kind of a topic of discussion, is that at Google those big companies they don't want to pay the San Francisco people the same as some of these others because of the cost of living thing. And now the people in San Francisco are like, what the heck? Like, I'm just going to move to Tulsa tomorrow and work remotely for the rest of my life. And their fear probably is that Google's going to be like, oh, you know what? Everybody needs to go back to the office starting tomorrow. And good luck in getting back here. I think so. A lot of it's TBD at this point on how that's going to pan out, because those companies have so much invested in their office infrastructure. They're building their second 30-story building here in Austin. Google is. I can't imagine they're just going to leave it vacant and just kind of swallow the cost of building that. But I think that's going to be something over the next 6 months to pay attention to, is if you accept a fully remote job, making sure that, the company you're accepting it with has a plan.
So I've actually heard rumors that, while other companies are, getting rid of their office spaces, Google's doubling down, and they're actually kind of, buying more space in New York. They're buying more space in, like you just said, in Austin. And one thing that I've heard is that it's kind of like the reason that you would go to the office in the first place is the culture and the community that comes with working with the other people. Like the cafeteria alone is like the networking hub of why you would go work in Google in the first place, because you meet everyone. Right. And so I could see why that would be like appealing for someone just coming out of college, wanting to date, wanting to meet some, whatever, like that could be appealing. But someone in their, midlife who's just getting into, development, the remote work is 100% the appeal of why you'd want to do it. If I could be in Cabo working, why not? Have you seen that more of a generational thing? Like the younger people want to be in the office and the older people don't. And then as far as recruiting on your end, how has the remote work kind of helped or hindered your job?
Yeah. The generational thing is interesting, because I do think there's a lot of there's a lot of data that supports like upcoming generations, obviously, or like have different awarenesses, have different motives for jobs and work and life. Whether it be work-life balance, whether it be they care more about kind of a company's mission statement or what they're doing, that the company gives back. I mean, there's all these different elements that I think every generation might kind of value more or less. But I do think one thing, you hit the nail on the head as far as like you miss, especially as a younger person in their career, like getting to interact with like-minded people. Yeah. When you're working at a tech company, you're working at a company, whether it be small or large, you are around like-minded people for the most part. And maybe you're even getting exposure to different, if that company pays attention to diversity and inclusion and they've built out like a foundation of that, maybe you're getting kind of insight into things that you hadn't come across before or even thought about before. Also, a lot of entrepreneurship occurs there. I mean, you have 2 or 3 software engineers have lunch every day at Google. Like they start talking about over lunch, like the company they want to create. And then boom, like you start this startup community that's just coming out of that. So I think the younger generation will be interested to see like if they stick with this wanting to be fully remote. Because right now, I think everybody just wants flexibility. They just don't want to be told what to do. They want to know that they have the option of going into the office or staying at home, which is difficult for a company because you're paying for that office 7 days a week. So if the person's only going in one day, like you're still having to pay for that office. So I think that creates a little bit of trouble. But the other thing that comes to mind about, 70% of the engineers in the US being in that 20 to 30s, like a lot of what you learn as a up and coming engineer or salesperson or customer success or marketing is you kind of look at your boss, you look at people that are above you and you try to kind of gauge like how hard they work, what they do, maybe their habits. And, you kind of try to match that or you try to outdo that so you can move up in your career. Like I know in sales, like the whole first person in the office there, last one to leave, like I would have never gotten that if I didn't go into an office and see like that standard set. And it raises the standard for the rest of those employees. So there's definitely pluses, but I do think the demand is so high that companies can't be too picky about requiring engineers to be in the office. But I'll be interested with the younger generation. A lot of these folks just getting in a van and kind of traveling the US and just working remotely. Like, I mean, it's pretty cool. If you have if you have the job to do it. I think the senior level talent pool, they've now worked at home and they kind of, I think, want to stick to that. Whereas the younger generation might be a little easier to talk them into it if you give them free breakfast, lunch, and dinner at the office, or you have beer on tap in the cafeteria, something like that.
That's crazy. Okay. So as someone, I'm actually in the process of going to a boot camp. I'm kind of in my midlife.
Really?
Yeah. And I started at the end of the month and I'm kind of, to be honest with you, I'm a little nervous about it, because I've heard that ageism is a real thing in the industry, and being in my mid 30s and coming into a career that's, dominated by the 21, 22-year-olds. Is that a valid fear, or is that something that, there's so much demand right now that it's not really an issue?
Yeah. And speaking from obviously my opinion, I'm in such a small sector. It's hard for me to generalize the entire tech community in recruiting. So I'll preface my statement with that. But what I think is what we've found, especially, with these Austin companies, is there is a huge initiative to not have just all these people that look the same or the same age, act the same. They want to bring in people that bring different backgrounds to the table. And yours, of course, like how maybe your background lends itself to with that skill set plus the software engineer skills you acquire in this boot camp, you might be an incredible fit for a tech company in the music industry that's looking for this unique blend of like someone who has industry knowledge but also can code. Like I will say the boot camp advantage is that the stereotype of computer science people that, code all day and don't socialize a lot, like, that stereotype, like these boot camps have enabled people with sales, marketing, finance backgrounds get into coding. So they kind of bring a different element, a different personality than what we're accustomed to. But as far as age, it's, to be honest, I mean, I would say that there are companies that are pretty, I don't know, fairly judgmental. And like sometimes they just tend to kind of go with what they think they're supposed to be hiring, which is like these young up and coming engineers. But I wouldn't say that's a majority by any means. I think the demand is so high. And also companies are so aware of kind of having a diversified team and having people at different age groups, different ethnicities, that it's, I think you shouldn't be too nervous. I think you're going to be in pretty good shape once you acquire that. But I would suggest, maybe even adding on to it and finding companies that might have some relation to your previous career, because you could be this perfect gem of like a mix of computer, software engineer plus your background in that industry. It's hard to find software engineers that can maybe get, interface with customers or run podcasts. So it might give you a skill set that very few have.
I was going to say, Spotify, are you listening out there?
Yeah. Spotify.
That's funny. I have an idea to work with the API on Spotify for a project that I'm working on. That's hilarious.
Well, I'm just saying, I mean, it hadn't occurred to me, this idea of trying to blend your skills, right? And especially in a recruiting capacity, right? If you're trying to solve or crack a difficult nut for a client, finding somebody with a unique set of skills that might be sort of outside of just, I don't know, your run of the mill full stack developer or whatever, actually could maybe give you an advantage. So I just wanted to go on that topic a little bit further. And I wanted to ask, like, if resumes matter anymore. So it seems like, so much of our, I guess, sort of networking and in-person relationships, and then, LinkedIn and all this stuff has like sort of taken the place of the traditional resume. And I wonder if that's, if I'm right about that at all. And then just sort of, you see all over social media, these jokes and stuff. I see these memes all the time about the beat down employer who's just, checking to see if the guy's still breathing so they can hire somebody. And while I understand that's probably more like, your lower level or entry level people, in maybe not such sophisticated jobs, I still wonder, how much is your resume matter versus that whole seat filling thing you were talking about earlier?
Yeah. LinkedIn, I would suggest to anyone, whether you're in tech or not, I do think LinkedIn is something that you have to create a profile on. Whether it's fully updated or not, maybe that's up to you, but so much, I would argue, it's changed, especially as of recently, but there's so many recruiters are investing time on LinkedIn versus using, the old school recruiting firms used to have this giant database of old resumes, and they'd use that to search for people and then call them and just smile and dial through phone numbers. Now, like, you want access to this new talent. You want access to talent that might not just be in Austin. Maybe it's in other cities, because now I got all these fully remote jobs I got to fill. So having a LinkedIn profile to where I can search for, Java developers in New York City, by, a couple clicks, I have a list of thousands of Java developers in New York City. And I don't even have to really have like a mutual connection to them if I'm using a certain LinkedIn tool. So I would say having that profile, something about the profile picture, and then also like recommendations of other employees that have worked with you. Sometimes it's from managers you've worked with in the past that are saying like, hey, Ryan's the most awesome, coder of all time. And like, he was great and helped us get to our next stage. Like, I think those little add-ons give it just a little more personality. And I also think with the, millennials and Gen X, like, we like social media. We prefer social media over looking through sheets of resumes all day. So I would say LinkedIn is very important if you're trying to like get noticed or get seen. So if you're not actively looking, like maybe keeping a LinkedIn profile. If you are actively looking, put a bunch of keywords on your LinkedIn profile, like make sure it reflects what you're currently doing. Secondarily though, to get to your question, sorry, on the resumes is there is still value there. And, I don't think it needs to be written as, all the resume writers out there probably hate me for saying that, but I don't think it needs to be some, Mona Lisa of a resume. I think it's a little more of just ensuring that like you're putting together something that is all in the same font. It's not anything more than 2 pages long. Ideally, you want it at 1 page. And you obviously want it to reflect like where you think your skill sets or experiences have been most applicable to that job. So that's been my recommendation to folks is like, keep in mind that it's kind of 50-50 of like LinkedIn, or maybe they'll find your resume on a job board. But I would suggest always having kind of a LinkedIn page handy, because you never know who's going to reach out. I mean, if you do want 300K base salaries, maybe Google will reach out to you, and it just depends.
Well, and I was going to say that, I mean, it's even interesting in preparation for this show. I mean, I know I do. I think Mike does too. I mean, we'll pop into LinkedIn. And I think what's nice about LinkedIn versus, a Facebook or an Instagram profile or something like that is the version of you that we get to learn about is sort of your business centric one. Oh, okay. Did this guy go to college or didn't he? What kind of jobs did he have prior to the one he's doing now? Does he have a book out that he's promoting? Like all these kinds of things are the stuff that you see on a LinkedIn profile. You're not getting wrapped up in people's families or, what they had for lunch or whatever. I mean, with some exceptions, of course, I see some of that crap. But generally speaking,
don't be that guy on LinkedIn. Just saying, don't do it.
Don't be that guy, please.
But generally speaking, people are somewhat, more professional on LinkedIn. And I think it helps you give, even if you're not doing recruiting, just like I say in the example here of prepping for an interview, it gives us this nice snapshot to just sort of understand sort of where a person's at, and maybe some of it is fueling generalizations and stuff. I don't know, you see you're going to interview somebody with the Harvard PhD and the, whatever, and you go, oh, okay, well, this guy must be a big deal, and then, you see somebody, with the community college background and go, okay, well, maybe I don't know. And so, so it's interesting how we can make these connections. But I think to your point, the idea is that, keeping up your LinkedIn and making sure it's at least somewhat relevant. I think mine goes back about 15 years is all. But, it's all the work that's sort of, relevant to what I do these days. And, but I think if somebody was to go to my LinkedIn profile, they could get a pretty decent snapshot of who I am, what I'm into. Am I even a fit, right? So if you come to me and you say, oh, well, we're looking for pharmaceutical reps, you might go, oh, okay, well, your profile doesn't look like that at all. And so I think it's, I think it's a useful tool. This is the moral.
Yeah. And it almost monopolizes. There's some other sites I think that are trying to compete with that kind of LinkedIn idea, but it's a social network. And some people post stuff that's not business related, which can be annoying, but I think it is something to at least be cognizant of for a job seeker or even a company is looking, I can say I hired Jim, I can click on Jim's connections and I could be like, hey, Jim, like, have you thought about hitting up Trisha and Dave, who like I see you're connected to? They're software engineers at, this company around the road. Like, would they be interested in working with us? Like, you kind of almost get like this imagery of their network, who they're connected to. And that could also add some credibility to someone. Like, wow, this guy is connected to Michael Dell. Like maybe he's got some crazy connects there, or he just has a cool friend group, or, I think there's like a variety of areas you can go there. But to me, it's always been like, it just gives, especially the millennials, Gen X, like they care more about personality and knowing someone past just a resume. At least, especially for the small companies we recruit for. They have to, they want as much assurance as possible that they kind of know who they're getting and that person fits, the multifaceted, willing to work hard, willing to buy into a smaller company that has a giant goal in mind. So it's almost like hedging their bets on like, if we're going to hire this person, we really want to look and see that they've worked at a company that's small, or worked at a company that's gone through a certain challenge. And if I'm looking at your LinkedIn, I can click on the old companies you've worked at, and I can look at that LinkedIn page and be like, oh, they're 300 people. It says they've grown from 100 to 300 in the last 2 years. Like, I bet Ryan's been through some hyper growth. Like, he was there for 2 years during that 100 to 300 stage. Like, I'm going to tell my client about that when I send Ryan's info to him, because, that's relevant. Maybe it's you worked at a company that got acquired by Google and now you're interviewing at Amazon. Like someone at Amazon is going to want to know that you worked at a company that got acquired by Google. That means that carries some credibility, that carries something. So I also think that's the thing. Whereas a resume, I can't click on the companies you worked at and just get an automatic hyperlink to their profile. That's something we do a lot on the recruiting side, especially for the startups we work with. Is like, if we want to find people that come from that community that have been a part of that hyper growth and those challenges, like we're researching every company these folks have worked at, and then we're chasing down those leads. Like, this is a great company to look at other engineers from. And so, I think there's a lot of advantages, but I would suggest having both updated, but I wouldn't put as much weight as maybe in the past on just your resume. That'd be my suggestion.
No, I think that's good advice, and for all the reasons that you were just describing.
I've heard that one of the main ways that developers will advance their salary or level up per se is they get that initial first job, they work there for about a year or two, and then they go and work somewhere else, because by leaving the current job that they're at and moving to somewhere else, shows the experience, but the first company isn't necessarily going to give you a $40,000 raise, but the second company is going to look at the demand and say, hey, he's good, he's got the skill, let's hire him, kind of thing. Is that kind of the trajectory that most entry level guys do, is they work at a place for a few years and then move on?
Yeah. If we're talking especially just software development, front end, back end, DevOps, infrastructure, cloud, like those skill sets, and even front end designers and web developers in general, it's tough not to go that route, because like you said, you can get a 40K bump by leaving after a year or two. And then probably in a year or two from there, you're going to have another 40, 50. I guess it kind of just that's what's caused, I think just as much as there a focus on hiring as there needs to be on retaining the current people you have. Like, if you have good software engineers, they are already getting blitzkrieged by recruiters. Like, I would almost guarantee that. So you need to be aware. A lot of the companies I work with, they'll just call me and ask me, like, what's the going salary right now for this skill set? And that's a good thing to use recruiters for too. If you're a candidate looking for jobs, like maybe you're not even actively looking, but you just want an idea of what the market's like, talk to a recruiter. Like, that's what they do all day. Like, they just talk to talent and find out what they're asking, what they're demanding, what companies are willing to pay.
What's a first year guy coming out of a boot camp usually start out with? 65, 70?
Yeah. And I think especially if you're looking at companies that have a bigger VC venture capital presence, there's more cash in the market, then it may be a little bit higher than that. But I think it's probably under 100K. But it would be in that 75s type of range would be kind of my sample size. Depending, and also the language, whatever you're working on, is it front end, back end, that matters.
What matters for that? Like, what's better? Is it front end, back end, full stack? Obviously full stack is better, but I mean, if you were to specialize in a language, does that set you apart to where, is there one language that's more in demand? Like, if you were to kind of, if I'm actually learning Chinese, versus Japanese, it's an entirely different demographic. Is there one that stands out over the others?
Yes. I mean, I would stay away from .NET software development, just because that tends to be the outdated one now. Yeah. The majority of the companies we hire for, and just emerging tech startups, they're using Node.js, so full stack JavaScript, and server side being Node.js. They are using Python, Golang, some Ruby on Rails. Those would be the core of languages I would suggest working in. But as long as they're driving from Java, you're probably in good shape. I would just stay away from .NET. Right. As far as front end versus back end, I do think back end developers, I think code, if you're going to a boot camp, it is harder to get into back end development right off the bat. because from what I understand, and again, this is someone that didn't get a computer science degree, but like getting into front end can be a little bit easier to get your foot in the door as a boot camp dev, but growing your skills and maybe eventually moving into full stack or trying to get to working more back end. I think if you're looking for astronomical comp numbers, like that's where the back end devs make the money, is all that data, all that goes on behind the scenes of a software app. Like that's where the big money's at. The front end development, there's still good money to be had. But it's a little more like elements of design and user experience. And I think maybe not quite as intricate of software development kind of going on the front end, because it's a mix of all these different personal elements and art elements and graphics elements. So I would say, like, what I've seen, most code camp level people will get in and penetrate doing front end development and then start to like ask how they can get more involved on the back end. Sure. And then you maybe become a full stack dev within, 2 to 5 years.
Yeah. It's hard because like these camps, they have, the full stack program, then they have data science program, then they've got all these different, you can do cybersecurity ones, you can do this, and all of them pay kind of in the same, starting out, pay kind of similar. And then it's like, once the data science is kind of like, I don't know, from what I can understand, it's almost like the Cadillac job, like if you want the high dollar, the good pay, data science is where it's at. But I kind of am leaning more towards the full stack because I like being able to do what I, like if I have a personal project I want to work on, I think it'd be nice to be able to know everything and be able to kind of, the way I look at it is if I can get my foot in the door in full stack or in front end, get a full stack career going, and then continually to learn like data science and all the other stuff that comes along. I think that's kind of the approach I want to go versus going right after data science and then not knowing the rest. So.
And full stack gives you options, right? I mean, if you can, maybe you start working back end, you're like, shoot, I really like this. And then you kind of figure out what you like and don't like maybe in that first job or two, and just trying to get more and more of that experience. But also to companies, like if you bring front end and back end expertise, that's more valuable than if you can just do front end. Now, I think bigger companies might, as we mentioned earlier, they're hiring in such a siloed area that they maybe they just want front end developers. Like they don't give a crap if you've done anything on the back end. Whereas smaller companies, as we've already talked about, like someone that can work front end one day and then maybe work on the back end the next day. So I do think having that having that multifaceted skill set makes you more of an attractive engineer to companies, especially the startups that are like these emerging, well-funded, the sexy companies to go join and be a part of. Yeah. And then data science, getting into data science right off the bat, I mean, that's tough. I know the code camps are fairly extensive there, but it's, you're competing against people that have PhDs and masters in mathematics and like this insane, just incredibly brilliant people, that are dealing with all these algorithms. And it's like, I think there's probably a longer churn cycle of getting to where you're viewed as a data scientist. Now, once you get there, you can make a crap load of money, and everyone wants data scientists because, the data is the key to the future. But I feel like it would take a lot more of you sitting around and just continuing to acquire knowledge, before you ever get the rep that some of the, how do you compare with a PhD? Do you have to work 10 years at a company to start being compared to that, or 20, or maybe never? I mean, right. I think there is a little bit of a skepticism there by tech companies. But data engineering has become a big thing, which is mix of software developer and data scientist. It's kind of like a hybrid of the two. That's become a huge talent demand from what we've seen over the last 6 months. Probably longer, but so yeah, if you enjoy data and crunching numbers and creating algorithms, it's a lucrative space. But you probably have to be willing to learn and study under some of those kind of masters in physics type people to really learn and read a lot of books, I'd imagine. So yeah.
So as we're starting to get here into the home stretch, I just wanted to spend a minute on sort of the other side of the coin, right? So if you are, one of these small companies competing against giants, or, you're trying to figure out maybe not just only how to keep or how to hire people, but how to get them to stay. what are the perks that are sort of driving employment right now that you're seeing? So, I mean, is it strictly about the money, or, I mean, you mentioned earlier that some people like, companies that give back and things like that, but are you seeing anything in your role as a recruiter, trend wise, that are sort of, these are the things that seem to be, cashing in on the top talent? Like, these are the things people want the most, or is it really just money?
No, yeah. I mean, generally, money is always going to be such a big part of a job. But, part of what we buy into, and then obviously the companies we represent, like this, your job is occupying 40 plus hours of your life per week. So in a lot of ways, your job is a big element of your life. So I think what we've seen is companies that have a mission or a story or some type of kind of us against the world type of kind of plan. I think that is an asset you have to use as a small company. If you're competing with Google over hiring a software engineer, like, you probably have to accept the fact that you're not going to match that salary the salary that they're going to offer. But where can you compete? Like, where can you win? And like, the question you just asked, and I think one of the biggest areas you can is in flexibility. Like, there is still a concern that Google is going to require people to go back to the office. So maybe it is like, we're going to be fully remote. We're going to do what's best for you. You don't need to be concerned about us forcing you into an office at some point. Like, we're always going to be flexible. So like, taking that route, can enable you to acquire maybe talent that you're not able to offer the same amount of comp. Stock options is a big thing. A lot of software engineers, a lot of talent in general still don't understand how stock options work. And I think that's on the companies to make sure that during the interview process, they're educating them on, we got this much funding based on, that VC valued us at 800 million. So can you imagine like where we're going to be in 2 or 3 years, and then helping them understand what that stock options might be worth someday. Now it is a long shot because we know that not all these tech startups make it or get bought or go IPO. But I think hitting on the stock options is probably the number 2 thing. And then the third is really like, when you're interviewing, like, you're selling the story, you're telling the mission of the company, but you're also really like, you're trying to use speed to your advantage. Like, you don't have this bureaucracy where someone, interviews at a FANG company and it's like 10 stages of all these different people and it takes a month to do.
Oh yeah.
If you're a small company, like most of our clients will get interviews done, like the complete process will be done within a week to 10 days. And that's to their advantage. They can get an offer out, they can capitalize on the momentum they build with that person. They have a better chance than, of course, if they drag it out for a month, which is what a lot of companies like to do because they want to make the right hire. Like, everybody wants to make the right hire, but you don't have that luxury in this market. And if you're going to be competing with the big companies, like, that's an area where you can win. Is how can you consolidate your interview process and make sure you still feel comfortable offering them, but you do it as quickly as possible because you know that other companies are coming in soon. So those would be the 3. The last is upper mobility career trajectory. So Ryan, like, you really need to work at our company because, like, you're just going to be a cog in the wheel over at Google. You're going to be a senior software engineer for the next 10 years there. Or you can come here and we're going to give you a lead title and we want you to build out a team, build out a practice, like build out a process for our company as we scale. So maybe to you, that opportunity, like that happened for me in my first job. I got recruited and they threw a director title at me after 1 year in the workplace. And I was like, hell yeah, like I want that. Now I ended up just being a sales guy for the first year or two with the director title, but I did eventually get the opportunity to kind of hire and grow a team and do things the way I always wanted to. So I think having that freedom and that ability to do that is an attraction for a smaller company. And you need to tell the candidates that, like these founders of these smaller tech companies, I tell them like, you need to provide that freedom because that's an attraction for talent, is that they have a say in what's going on and how the product's created, things like that. So I think there's a lot of areas these smaller, other companies can compete with these big offers, but you're going to come across talent that all they care about is cash, all they care about is money. And that's okay. I mean, it's the world we live in, obviously, but, that's the challenge that we face for our clients is finding people that, our clients can still pay good money. They just may not pay the FANG money. So those would be the other areas I would suggest.
Cool.
I don't know if any others come to mind to y'all, or I'm probably missing on a couple, but yeah.
Well, and I think that those are all really great because I think they all play to that sort of, understanding the why of the organization you work with. You're never going to rule out the guy that just wants money, but this is good, for, developing some sort of stake in the business you're working for. So I think that those might actually be, I mean, for like the millennial who's excited about the company, who's going to give money to charity or something, like I would be way more jacked by the opportunity to work for a company that I could actually influence the software we're building, or I could actually take an ownership role someday, or, that seems infinitely more appealing to me anyway, than somebody just giving money away. And so I think that, obviously different strokes for different folks, but I do think that those are really strong characteristics and good things to consider, if you're a smaller company in sort of a land of giants.
Yeah. Well, Chase, we're almost to that time. You want to tell people where they can reach out and find more about you, and if they are looking for a new job and have a few years of experience, how they can get in contact?
Yeah, and I think we're always happy to talk to folks that are earlier in their career. We plan on being around for a while, so maybe we can't help right this second, but we can point you in a direction, and maybe we work together in a couple of years. We've hit on it already, but LinkedIn is probably the best place to talk with me. So it's just Chase Kocher, Aim for Hire, obviously on LinkedIn would probably be the best way. My email is chase@aimforhire.com as well. So, I think those would probably be my suggestions on the best way to get a hold of us. But, we've got a team of 12 or 11 now and growing pretty fast. And we do have, all types of positions. A lot of the companies we work with, they start off with us working on their engineering roles, but then they start asking for, sales reps or marketing or accounting, finance. So I think, regardless of your skill set, we certainly are always looking to connect with top talent.
That's great.
Great. Well, yeah, no, thanks so much, Chase. That's awesome. And I think really good information, especially for people right now, because it's such a wild job market. Literally, I can't tell you a business I've been to in the last week that doesn't have a help wanted sign in the window. And I understand that, apples and oranges to the tech biz, but I imagine that, even at that level, it's, this is something that's permeating the place right now. So it's really a great time to be looking for work. Like if you need work, now's a good time to find it. So I think you covered a lot of great material, and I think people will be able to act on it. So thanks so much for that.
Absolutely. No, it's been a pleasure being here, guys. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah,
awesome.
No problem.
Well, thanks so much to everybody who tunes in to this podcast each week and every week and helps us build our community on YouTube and everywhere else that we are located. So I guess until next time, we'll see you then.